September 14th, 1985. A Saturday. Across the United States, approximately 40 million children woke up before their parents did. No alarm clock, no school bus to catch, no schedule to follow. And yet, by 7 o'clock in the morning, in houses from Maine to Southern California, millions of television sets were already glowing in darkened living rooms. The sun was barely up in most time zones. In the eastern half of the country, the first Saturday after school had resumed carried a specific energy. The weekend felt earned, almost sacred. Fall air was just beginning to cool. In living rooms and dens, on shag carpet and linoleum floors, children sat cross-legged or sprawled on their stomachs, still in pajamas, bowls of cereal balanced on knees or resting on the carpet beside them. Nobody told them to be there. Nobody had to. This was Saturday morning in America. And in the fall of 1985, all three major broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, were locked in one of the most intense programming battles of the decade. Not for prime time, not for news ratings, for children. For the hours between roughly 7 a.m. and noon, when an entire generation sat in near-perfect stillness and absorbed what the networks offered them. NBC had the Smurfs, still dominant after 4 seasons. ABC countered with the Bugs Bunny Looney Tunes Comedy Hour alongside newer offerings. CBS was running Muppet Babies and the Berenstain Bears. And beyond the broadcast dial, syndicated weekday cartoons like He-Man, Transformers, and G.I. Joe had already been reshaping what kids expected from animated television. But Saturday mornings were different from anything that aired on a Tuesday after school. Saturday morning was not just programming, it was a shared national experience, one of the last that American children would ever have in quite the same way, and most of them had no idea it would ever end. To understand why Saturday mornings mattered so much in the 1980s, you have to understand what came before and what changed. The tradition of Saturday morning cartoons had been building since the late 1960s, when the three networks realized they could dedicate an entire block of weekend programming to children and sell advertising time around it, primarily for cereal, toys, and sugary snacks. By the mid-1970s, the pattern was firmly established, but it was in the 1980s that the machine truly accelerated. In 1984, the Federal Communications Commission under the Reagan administration significantly deregulated children's television. The rules that had previously limited how much commercial content could be woven into kids' programming were loosened. The practical effect was immediate and enormous. Toy companies could now produce cartoons that were, essentially, 30-minute advertisements for their product lines. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which had debuted in syndication in 1983, became the template. Mattel funded the show sold the toys funded more episodes. It was a closed loop, and it worked spectacularly. Hasbro followed with Transformers and G.I. Joe. Kenner backed Care Bears. Tonka had GoBots. Within 2 years, the American toy industry and the American animation industry had become nearly inseparable. These decisions, made in boardrooms and regulatory offices in Washington and New York, would soon reshape living rooms, playgrounds, and breakfast tables in every corner of the country. Children didn't know any of this. They just knew the cartoons were better than ever, or at least that there were more of them than ever. And that flood of content turned Saturday mornings into something much bigger than a few hours of television. It became a weekly ritual with its own rhythms, its own economy, and its own emotional architecture. It almost always started the same way. Eyes open in a still dark bedroom, a glance at the clock, the red digital numbers of a GE alarm clock, or the faintly glowing hands of a wind-up, confirming that it was early enough. 6:15, 6:30, maybe 6:45 if you were pushing it. There was no negotiation with sleep. The body simply knew. 5 days of dragging yourself out of bed for school, and now, on the one morning you could sleep late, you were awake before dawn. Not because anyone made you, because something was waiting. Feet on cold floor, down the hallway, careful to step over the creaky board. The house still quiet, parents asleep, siblings maybe already camped in front of the set, maybe not yet stirring. The television clicked on with that particular sound of a cathode ray tube warming up, the static hiss, and then the slow bloom of color on the screen. If you were early enough, you'd catch the tail end of a test pattern or a farm report, the dead air between the adult world's programming and yours. Breakfast was not negotiated either. It was cereal. It was almost always cereal. The kitchen counter in a 1980s American home on Saturday morning was a specific landscape. A row of boxes, Cap'n Crunch, Frosted Flakes, Lucky Charms, Fruit Loops, Cocoa Puffs, their mascots grinning from cardboard faces that had become as familiar as family photographs. The choices were deeply personal. Some kids were loyal to a single brand for years, others rotated. Some mixed two brands in the same bowl, creating combinations that horrified parents and delighted no one but themselves. The milk came from the fridge. The bowl, usually something durable, maybe Corelle, maybe a heavy plastic thing in faded yellow or orange, got filled. And then the walk back to the television, careful not to spill. No table, no placemat. The carpet was the table. The couch cushion was the chair. The spoon clinked against the bowl in the near silence of the house, and on the screen, the morning was beginning. When the cereal was gone, the leftover milk, now tinted pink from Frankenberry or vaguely brown from Cocoa Pebbles, was either drunk straight from the bowl or left sitting on the floor, slowly warming, forgotten in the trance of the screen. Every kid knew the schedule, not because they studied it, but because repetition carved it into memory the way water carves stone. You knew that the Smurfs were on NBC at a certain time. You knew that Muppet Babies came on CBS. You knew when to switch channels and when to stay put. In homes with only one television, which in the early 1980s was still the majority of American households, channel selection was a matter of either consensus or hierarchy. Older siblings had leverage. Younger ones learned to adapt or negotiate. The remote control, if the family owned one, was an object of real power. In millions of homes, the television still required someone to physically walk to the set and turn the dial. Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7. The knob clicked into place with a satisfying mechanical snap, and the picture scrambled briefly before resolving into a new world. The lineup changed each September, and the anticipation leading up to it was genuine. Networks ran Friday evening preview specials, sometimes hosted by primetime stars, showing clips of the upcoming Saturday morning shows. Kids watched these previews the way adults watched movie trailers, forming opinions, choosing allegiances, deciding which network would get their loyalty that fall. Between the shows, the commercials ran, and the commercials were not filler. They were part of the architecture. Ads for toys, for sugary cereals, for board games, for action figures. They were produced with the same energy and color as the cartoons themselves. A 30-second spot for Castle Grayskull or the Millennium Falcon was not an interruption. It was an event. Children absorbed them completely, frame by frame, jingle by jingle. By Monday morning, they would be reciting those jingles on the playground, requesting products by name, building Christmas lists months in advance based almost entirely on what they had seen during commercial breaks. The pathway from Saturday morning television to a child's deepest material desires was remarkably short, and every advertiser in the toy industry knew it. The commercial breaks also served a practical function. They were the bathroom window, the cereal refill window, the brief negotiation window for siblings arguing over what to watch next. The rhythm of show, commercial, created a pulse that governed the entire morning, and everyone in the house, consciously or not, moved to its beat. There was something else happening in those hours that was harder to name but deeply felt. For a few hours every Saturday, the living room belonged to the children. During the week, that room operated on adult terms. Dad watched the evening news. Mom had her programs. The furniture arrangement, the lighting, the volume, all of it was governed by grown-up preferences. But on Saturday mornings, before anyone else was awake, the room transformed. The volume was kid-controlled. The channel was kid-chosen. The floor became a campsite. Blankets were dragged off beds. Pillows were stacked. Some kids built small forts out of couch cushions and watched from inside them. Some brought stuffed animals or action figures and played quietly alongside the broadcast, their toys reenacting whatever was happening on the screen. It was autonomous space, unsupervised time, not because parents were neglectful, they were simply asleep, or enjoying their own quiet morning with coffee and the newspaper in the kitchen. The kids had the run of the house, and the television was the center of their temporary kingdom. For an era before the internet, before smartphones, before on-demand anything, this was one of the few windows in a child's week where they felt genuinely in charge of their own experience. No teacher, no parent directing them, no structured activity. Just them, the screen, and a bowl of cereal. In some neighborhoods, the ritual extended beyond the walls of a single house. A friend might show up at the back door at 7:30 in the morning, still in pajamas, having walked across the yard or down the block. Some homes became the default Saturday morning gathering spot, the house with the bigger TV or the better cereal selection, or the parents who slept the latest. 2 or 3 kids piled onto a couch designed for 2 adults, shoulders touching, arguing in whispers about the channel. These weren't playdates. Nobody's mom arranged them. They were spontaneous, organic, driven entirely by the gravity of the ritual. You went where the cartoons were, and you stayed until they were over, or until someone's parent called them home for chores. The ritual had a natural endpoint, and it arrived the same way every week. By mid-morning, parents were up, coffee was brewed, errands were discussed. The energy of the household shifted from stillness to motion. Around 11 or 11:30, the cartoon blocks began winding down, replaced by sports pregame shows, Saved by the Bell reruns, or live-action programming that held no magic for a 9-year-old. The transition was gradual. You could feel the mornings slipping away as the programming softened, as the house filled with adult voices and the clatter of dishes being washed. And then the television went off, or the channel changed, and the kids were ushered outside. Go play, ride your bike, be back by lunch. The outside world was waiting, and it had its own rituals. But Saturday morning, that first private, glowing, cereal-scented stretch of hours was finished for another week, and there was nothing to do but wait 7 days for the next one. What felt intensely personal, your cereal, your carpet, your remote control, was in fact one of the most carefully engineered mass media experiences in American history. By the mid-1980s, the 3 broadcast networks were spending hundreds of millions of dollars annually on Saturday morning programming. The competition was fierce. Each September, the networks unveiled their new fall Saturday morning lineups with the same fanfare they gave to primetime. ABC, CBS, and NBC ran promotional specials on Friday evenings, sometimes hosted by celebrities, previewing the new cartoons, building anticipation, treating children like a coveted audience demographic worth billions. And the audience was enormous. At its peak, the Saturday morning cartoon block attracted viewership numbers that would be considered extraordinary for any time slot. Nielsen estimated that in the early to mid-1980s, roughly 20 million children were watching Saturday morning cartoons on any given weekend. Some industry analyses put the combined audience, including teenagers and adults who lingered, considerably higher. The advertising revenue was staggering. Toy companies spent more on Saturday morning ad buys than almost any other media channel. In 1985 alone, the toy industry's television advertising spending was estimated at over $850 million, a significant portion of which was concentrated in Saturday morning and weekday afternoon cartoon slots. The pathway from screen to store shelf to Christmas morning was short and well paved, and everyone in the industry knew exactly how to walk it. Not everyone was comfortable with this arrangement. Peggy Charon, founder of Action for Children's Television, a watchdog group she had started back in 1968, spent years advocating for stronger regulations on children's programming. She argued that the FCC's deregulation had turned Saturday mornings into a commercial free-for-all, where the line between entertainment and advertising had been deliberately erased. Her advocacy was persistent, principled, and largely ignored by the industry, though it would eventually bear fruit. Charon's efforts, along with those of other child advocacy organizations, contributed to the passage of the Children's Television Act of 1990, which reimposed limits on commercial time during kids' programming and required stations to serve children's educational needs. It was a significant legislative response, but by the time it took full effect, the landscape it was trying to regulate had already begun to change in ways nobody fully anticipated. For the children sitting on those living room floors in the mid-1980s, though, the debate happening in Washington felt as distant as the moon. All they knew was that Saturday morning was the best morning of the week, and they were right. But here's the thing about Saturday morning cartoons that almost never comes up in the nostalgia conversations. The thing that made them matter far beyond the animation quality or the toy commercials or the sugar content of the cereal. They were shared. On Monday morning, in any elementary school in America, the previous Saturday's cartoons were common currency. Every child had watched roughly the same things. They had seen the same episodes, absorbed the same cliffhangers, laughed at the same gags. The playground conversation didn't require explanation or context. You didn't have to ask, "Did you see it?" Everyone had seen it. This seems like a small thing now. It was not. In an era before streaming, before personalized algorithms, before hundreds of cable channels splintered the audience into ever smaller fragments, Saturday morning cartoons were one of the last truly universal shared experiences among American children. A kid in rural Arkansas and a kid in suburban New Jersey and a kid in downtown Chicago all had the same 3 networks, the same time slots, the same Smurfs, the same Transformers, the same commercials for the same cereals. It created a common language, a common frame of reference, a common childhood. And it wasn't just the content, it was the ritual itself. The early waking, the dark house, the quiet autonomy, the cereal, the carpet, the glow of the screen. Millions of children in millions of separate homes performing the same small private ceremony at the same time, without coordinating, without being instructed, without even knowing that the kid 3 streets over was doing the exact same thing at the exact same moment. There is something deeply human about that, about a generation unconsciously synchronized, not by technology, not by social media, not by an algorithm, but by 3 television networks and the simple fact that Saturday came once a week and cartoons were on. That kind of invisible, effortless, national-scale togetherness doesn't really exist anymore, and the people who lived through it didn't realize how rare it was until long after it was gone. Saturday morning cartoons didn't die in a single moment. They faded, gradually, the way a radio signal weakens the farther you drive from the city. The first cracks appeared in the late 1980s when cable television reached a critical mass of American households. Nickelodeon, which had launched in 1979, steadily grew into a powerhouse, and crucially, it offered cartoons every day, not just Saturday mornings. The Disney Channel expanded its animated offerings. By the early 1990s, Fox had entered the Saturday morning competition with its own block. The audience wasn't shrinking, it was scattering. Then came the Cartoon Network in 1992, an entire channel devoted to animation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The very concept of a special time for cartoons started to erode. Why wait until Saturday when you could watch cartoons on a Wednesday evening? The Children's Television Act of 1990 and the FCC's strengthened enforcement of its educational requirements in 1996 also changed the economics. Networks were now required to air a minimum of 3 hours per week of educational programming for children. Some stations found it simpler to fulfill these requirements with cheaper live-action shows rather than expensive animated productions. The incentive structure that had fueled the Saturday morning arms race began to weaken from the inside. Through the late 1990s and into the 2000s, the broadcast networks gradually retreated. One by one, they reduced their Saturday morning cartoon blocks, replaced them with news programs, teen-oriented live action, or simply handed the time slots to other content. NBC abandoned its dedicated Saturday morning cartoons in 1992. CBS followed later in the decade. ABC held on somewhat longer before transitioning as well. The final broadcast network's Saturday morning cartoon block, the CW's Vortex, aired its last episode on September 27, 2014. It was replaced by a block of educational programming called One Magnificent Morning. The era was officially over. But for most people who had lived through it, Saturday morning cartoons had ended long before that, somewhere in their own childhoods, on a particular Saturday morning when they slept in for the first time and didn't miss what they'd missed. Today, a child in America can watch virtually any cartoon ever made, at any moment, on any device. The library is infinite, the access is instant, the wait is zero. And yet, something is different. Not worse, necessarily, but unmistakably different. The scarcity of Saturday morning cartoons was part of what made them matter. You couldn't pause them. You couldn't rewind them. If you missed an episode, it was gone until the summer rerun cycle. And even then, there was no guarantee you'd catch it. That constraint created attention. It created anticipation. It created a kind of respect for the experience that unlimited access quietly dissolves. There was also the communal dimension. When every kid watched the same shows at the same time, it wasn't just entertainment, it was social infrastructure. It gave children a shared world to inhabit on Monday morning. Today's kids have access to vastly more content, but they often watch different things at different times on different screens in different rooms. The experience is richer in choice and poorer in connection. And there was the autonomy, that quiet, unsupervised stretch of early morning hours when children governed their own experience. Parents were asleep, the living room was theirs. The choices were theirs. In an age of parental controls, screen time limits, and algorithm-curated content feeds, that kind of unstructured, self-directed engagement feels like something from a different century, which increasingly it is. None of this is to say the past was better. The cartoons were often formulaic, the commercials were deliberately manipulative, the sugar content of the cereal was genuinely alarming. The FCC deregulation that enabled the toy cartoon pipeline was a legitimate policy concern, and advocates like Peggy Charn were right to push back against it. But the experience, the lived, felt, remembered experience was something real. And for the generation that grew up inside it, Saturday mornings weren't just a time slot, they were a place, a feeling, a weekly appointment with a kind of happiness that was simple and complete and required nothing more than a television, a bowl of cereal, and an internal alarm that nobody had to set. If you grew up in 1980s America or anywhere that Saturday morning cartoons reached, you know exactly what this felt like. You remember the cold floor under your feet, the click of the television powering on, the glow filling a dark room, the taste of the milk at the bottom of the cereal bowl turned sweet and faintly colored from whatever you'd been eating. You remember the shows, maybe not every episode, but the feeling of them. The theme songs that still live somewhere in the back of your mind, ready to surface the instant someone hums the first few notes. And you remember the stillness of the house around you, the quiet before the day truly began, the sense that for a few hours, the world was small and bright and entirely yours. If that was your childhood, tell us about it. What was your cereal? What was the one show you refused to miss no matter what? What do you remember most, not about the cartoons themselves, but about those mornings? Drop it in the comments, because those memories belong to all of us, and the longer we share them, the longer they last.